So we're looking at Unit 4 for Education and Training Level 4. And this unit is all about assessing your learners. So it's assessing learners in education and training. Now, it's got 4 learning outcomes. The first one is, it just starts off quite nice and simply. What are the different types and methods of assessment? Then learning outcome 2 is how do you actually carry out those assessments internally and externally? Then again, we come to minimum core elements. So how do we implement minimum core like English, Maths, ICT when we're assessing learners? Then the fourth one is how to evaluate an assessment of your own practice. So it's about you, the last section. So onto here, we've got 5 assessment criteria. So the whole learning outcome is be able to use types and methods of assessment to meet the needs of individual learners. So we're just going to go 1.1, explain the purposes of types of assessments used in education and training. 1.2, analyze the effectiveness of assessment methods in relation to meeting the individual needs of learners. 1.3 is use types and methods of assessment to meet the individual need of learners. 1.4 is use peer and self-assessment to promote learners' involvement and personal responsibility in the assessment for and of their learning. And then the last one is use questioning and feedback to contribute to assessment processes. I'm always out of breath when I've read these. And let's go on to here and there. So on here, we're just going, like I said, we're going to talk about assessments. You know, at the moment, you're carrying out a lot of assessments at the start of the year for your new class. You're going to be seeing what level they're at. You're going to see what their previous assessment results were. Are they still on par with those results, or have they reduced, or have they progressed? And to be honest, where you're starting off with them. So those initial assessments that you're starting off at the beginning of the year, they're just going to let you know how your student is progressing, which is the same with any type of assessment. It'll give you information that'll help you to plan and differentiate your lessons or your plans, depending on what your students' needs are. So they're quite important. It really gives you a very good, clear idea of what the starting base is, and then how you can go and help them progress. So 1.1, the purposes of types of assessments in education. So there are a lot of different types of assessments. You've got initial and diagnostic, you've got formative, you've got summative, and you've got holistic. Now, I was doing some research and assessments actually, and I noticed that there's quite a lot more than these out. There are assessments that are called progressive as well. But to be honest, these are the main ones that we use within teaching, and there are a few new ones, or maybe they're old and then can get used as assessments as well, but it's not something that I've touched upon within teaching. So I just focused on these ones. So for initial or diagnostic assessment, so these are conducted at the beginning of a course of study or the start of the school year. So an initial assessment, it helps you to build a clear, accurate and relevant picture of your student, what their attainment is, what their potential is, and it also helps you to set up a basis, like a ground for what their learning will be and what their assessment opportunities will be. Now, an initial assessment is normally just to find out if they've got any learning requirements, language requirements, or, you know, the basic things. A diagnostic assessment will actually look at what their maths, English, and ICT abilities are. So it's a little bit more in depth. But first you do initial, then you do a diagnostic after that.
So initial and diagnostic are different?
They are different, yes. So to be honest, some places only do an initial assessment. like with you now, you're at school, you'll be doing something like a mix of an initial / a diagnostic, because they can be quite closely linked to each other as well. So it's not necessary that you have two separate assessments to find out what their initial needs are or what the diagnostic. Within this, for the younger children, you normally do it all rolled into one. For older students, you'd probably do it as two different assessments. First one would be just you having a conversation in a way with your students. So if you were to come up to me, I'm your student, first time you met me, you talk to me, you find out about my background, you find out about what my language needs are, if I've got any learning needs, if there's anything obstructing me, or all of those type of things, just to find out what I'm like as a person and if I have any learning requirements that will need additional planning. A diagnostic will be, say, if we're starting this education and training course now, and I've come fresh out of school into it. I've never worked as a TA or within a school ever, and you're actually trying to find out what my knowledge is. So a diagnostic will work as what your subject knowledge is for the course that you're studying. On a basic level, it's just things like maths, English, and IT. If you're, but if it's something like quite a particular course of subject that you want, just like if I want to go into law or business, then you need to know what my knowledge is within that and work off there.
Okay.
Yeah. But I bunch them together because within the school environment that you're in now, they're more or less carried out as part of each other.
Mm-hmm.
So the purposes of these initial and diagnostic assessments are to understand what your learners have already achieved, which is their attainment, and what they should be able to achieve in the future, which is their potential. So these initial assessments will help you to identify these following factors. So they'll help you to identify the learner's learning needs, what they need to learn and what can they improve, and then also help you to support their needs. So how will they learn the best? You can also carry out like what your learning styles are for your students as well. To know, are they visual, kinesthetic, read, write, auditory, all those, so that you can incorporate that in at this point as well. And again, what makes them learn most happily. Now, if you were to give me a textbook without any pictures or diagrams, which wasn't colourful, I would not want to read it. Unless it's a novel, that's a different story. But if it was like a textbook that was given to me like that, I wouldn't want to even open it. And I've had books like that where I've bought them, I've flicked through them, then I've just put them down and done independent study on the internet instead. But if you were to give me a book that had loads of graphs and pictures and charts and statistics and was colourful with different borders on it, I'd very happily sit there for hours looking through it and finding things. So it really, the things that you use and the way you teach, it really does help a learner if they're going to learn happily or not. So you had your initial / diagnostic, and now you've got a formative. Now, this is formative is an assessment that happens throughout learning, so you're always doing it. So it's something like if you're asking a question, or in a basic way, you're getting students to put their hand up to show that they're understanding you, or getting them to answer you. Those are many things that you're doing all the time, during the day, during the week, during the term. So these formative assessments, they just refer to a wide variety of methods that teachers and TAs use to just conduct evaluations of your students' comprehension, of their learning needs, and of their progress. So this can be done throughout a lesson. It can be done through a unit. It can be done throughout the course. It can be done by getting them to stick their hands up, like I said, or even having a quick question and answer session, just to make sure that, okay, what did we talk about? Can you tell me one point you liked about today's lesson? Those type of things.
Mm-hmm.
So formative assessments actually help teaching staff to identify the concepts that the things that the students are struggling with, what they might have difficulty getting a hang of, or also what sort of learning standards that they might not have achieved. So once they've identified those, they can actually go back and adjust them. Now, if you were to just do a initial assessment, and then we're going to come on to summative soon, a summative assessment, which happens right at the end, like an exam, from between the initial and that summative, that last exam that you're doing, you're not going to really know what's going on with your student. You'll have no idea whether or not what you're teaching them has actually sunk in, or if they've, you know, really digested it or not. So these formative are really good because it really helps you. Like when you've got your intervention classes for maths, when you've got them in there, sometimes you'll notice one child might be struggling to use their counters or not understanding how to do 1 to 20. Then you'll go back and you think, right, they're struggling right here. They're not able to answer me or make up the equation I'm asking them to do. So in the next lesson, you'll make it simpler and simpler and simpler until you can build them back up to where you want them to. So that is what formative assessments help you do. So formative assessments are integrated into your teaching and learning process on a daily process. So an example of this is a formative assessment technique. Like I said, stick your hand up, ask your students a question, ask them to raise their hands, and then they'll let you know whether or not they've understood a concept. So you can read them a story and ask them to pay attention. Then you can say, okay, what did Jack climb up? And then if are they able to answer you, what came down after Jack for Jack and the Beanstalk? What did Jack take from the giant? You know, was it was it a goose that laid golden eggs, or was it a guitar, or was it a brand new gold pair of shoes? So you'll know if they answer like, oh, it was a goose that laid golden eggs, then you know that they have actually understood and they've been paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
So now on to summative assessments. Now, summative assessment is like, do you know when you might have a spelling test, or you, like at the end of term, you might have assessments, or like spring, autumn, winter assessments that you carry out on the older children for year 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah.
Those are even GCSE exams. Those are summative assessments. They're the benchmark that you're doing, the tests or that you're doing to show that, okay, this is what the student has learned. Is that right at the end of the teaching?
Mm-hmm.
It can also happen, say, if you were teaching shapes in maths, or you were talking about a particular book in comprehension. You might just have this at the last lesson just to know what they've actually retained if you have to go back and relearn about it again. So we've got purposes for summative assessment. So I'm just going to go through this information here. So summative assessments help instructors to get the granular performance data they and their students need. So just the basic information that they need, the data to, if they've achieved their examinations, what did they get, how well has this been perceived for them. They'll also have exam items and course topics and learning objectives where they can look back at those and get detailed feedback to see, okay, this little section here, the students seem to have done really well. On this section here, everybody in the class has had a drawback on it. Was it the fact that it wasn't taught in the right manner? Was it too difficult for them? Didn't I use the correct type of resources? So if one person doesn't get the results that you thought they would, that's okay, because everybody else has, you know, to focus on that child. But if everybody gets similar results where they're not coming to a particular conclusion where you thought, so you're going to look at your own teaching strategies then. With summative assessments at the end of key stages, they'll look at the curriculum, they look at high-stake exams, and all of these like tests, exams, assessments, they'll take place just so that you can get your performance feedback for students, see what performance they did, and also as an educator, you can actually see how well your students retained the information and actually how well you did your job. So did you do it in the correct manner? Was it suitable for them, or should you have adapted it or made it more difficult? And again, at the end of everything, it just helps you to evaluate your students' learning, and you can compare your unit by unit or exam by exam and see against the benchmarks or the national curriculum, is this what was expected, or have they all fallen below, or have they all come ahead of what we thought they would do? Are you okay with these 3 points that I've gone over?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so now on to holistic assessment. Are you okay with the term holistic?
Would be better if you can
Yeah.
explain again.
So holistic, it means you'll have heard of this when you were doing your TA qualifications. Holistic is when you're looking at everything around you. So you've got a child, for example. You're not just looking at them and their education, or them and their home life, or them and their mental needs or learning needs. You're looking at every single thing about that person. You're looking at that child's teaching, the school that they're in, looking at the environment, you're looking at their home environment, you're looking to see how much support they've got, what their mental health is, what their physical health is. So you're looking at every single aspect of that child's life.
Mm-hmm.
When you're coming into assessments, holistic assessment is done in a slightly different way in schools. So you're looking at different sources of information to get to your feedback, to get that information you want. So you might have a student that is very quiet in class. They'll just get on with work, but when you try and actually speak to them or try and get them to do an assessment with it, you'll find, especially with the new students, they don't like talking loudly to you, and sometimes they get shy and they don't answer you. Even though in the last assessment they're showing that they knew 20 out of 38 sounds in phonics, but this year they're not even showing you that they know 2 of them. So you want to find out how what the real information is about them. So you've got to look at lots of different sources. So with this, you're going to be looking at them when they're working in class. You're not just going to be sitting next to each other and doing a formal assessment. You're going to assess the work that they physically produce in class. You look at them in the playtime, you look at them at lunchtime, you'll see how they interact with other students, what their vocabulary is like. If they're doing artwork, what sort of things are they doing? So you're looking at different aspects in total of what they do on a daily basis and forming an assessment in that way. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. So the purpose of holistic assessments is it's just there to look at a range of evidences or combination of evidences from different tools and perspectives. So it might not just be you. If we're both working with one child and I've gone in and I've tried to get an assessment and they've only shown that they know about 4 sounds from phonics and they're not able to count to 10 for me. They're just really quiet. They're not responsive. But for you, if they've gone in and they're always talking to you and they're having big conversations, maybe while you're sitting there talking to them, you could turn around and say, oh, okay, can you count how many flowers are on that tree or on that bush over there? Then they might just count from 1 to 10 for you. So it's doing that assessment using different tools and different settings rather than the formal setting where you're in a room on your own or in a hall on your own. You're using the playground and the things around you.
Mm-hmm.
So this will help you to get a good picture of what their prior ability is and also of their current ability at the moment. So that was 1.1. So on here, when you want to answer this, just look at the different types of assessments and just explain how and why these are used in educational settings. So talk about initial and diagnostic. You can bunch them together. Do formative, summative, and holistic. On here, I just want you to have a paragraph for each one, and then just put a couple of sentences examples. Say, holistic assessment is used in my classroom setting by doing this. Formative is done by asking questions, conversing with each other, having putting your hands up to see if they retained any information or not. Initial assessments are done, but you can explain what you're doing right now and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to stick a light on. It's gone suddenly very dark in here. That's better. So, on to 1.2. We're going to analyze the effectiveness of assessment methods in relation to meeting the individual needs of learners. So first we looked at assessment types. Now we're going to look at assessment methods. Now it can get quite confusing when you think, oh, they're exactly the same, but they're not, because you know what assessment type is, like formative, summative, and so on. And the method is how you actually carry those out, because they can be carried out in a lot of different ways and age-appropriate ways as well. You know, on here, I probably would have put down verbal on here. Oh, we have got verbal here, that's fine. So methods of assessment are like observations. This is mostly for the older students, multiple choice questions. You can look at case studies and questioning techniques. So an educator can actually observe a learner at any time. So it can be done through lesson, breaks, supervised activities, whenever they're in and around you. And assessments can be written, oral, formal, and informal. Now, I remember a couple of years ago, we were scrambling around trying to figure out, we had a few assessments that needed doing, we had a small time scale, and then we had a whole load of staff that was ill at the moment, which is the norm at the moment, unfortunately. So loads of staff absences, so we were teaching the lessons, and there was myself and a couple of other staff members, we were going around the class while the children are doing their work with a clipboard, their name, a piece of paper on it, and we were just sort of like making little observations. Child X is able to cut in a straight line, or child Y can put items in a sequential order, and so on, just so that we can try and catch up onto little assessment pieces and things to get information. So really, it can be done in a split second as well. And it probably only took about a minute or 2 minutes with each children, but we had a nice little snippet which we could add in. So it can be done written, orally, formally, and informally. So just to go into detail on these ones, a multiple choice question is where you've got one question and you've got a couple of choices, like 3 or 4 answers that you've got, and all they've got to do is read through those answers and select one single one. They know that there'll be 1 in 4 chance they're going to get it right, because that's all there is, but then it's a bit easier for them because they're not having to formulate sentences. They can just read and tick off.
Yeah.
Got case studies. So educators will ask a student to analyze a hypothetical situation, or they'll ask you to look at an actual case that might have happened. And this is probably for older students. And then they'll say, okay, there was, for example, within law. I remember marking an assignment where there was a case study that the students had to look at, and they were looking at a particular case between 2 people, and one had a painting that they had purchased. The other's person had the issue was that painting belonged to my family, and it was stolen from us centuries ago, and now it's been relocated. I'm the rightful owner. So who was the right person? Who was the rightful owner in that? So those students had to look at ethics and law and things and actually try and formulate a hypothetical answer. And it just helped to understand what their reasoning was, what their judgments were. So it can be done in a whole load of different ways. Case studies are quite good. You can use questioning techniques, and these are quite a good way to assess the knowledge and understanding of your learners. Now, for younger learners, I quite like this, and this is because when you question someone in your class, you'll notice that if one person has an answer, everybody will have that parrot mentality where they'll all say the same thing as that child. So, you know, if you're saying, what, a 6 add 4, and then one will say 10, and then everyone's like, oh, yeah, it is 10, it's 10, isn't it? Yeah, it's 10. You don't know if they've taught that on their own besides that one child that spoke up first, or if everybody's just copied. So you've got something called the think, pair, share strategies. Now, this is something that a lot of teachers have started using. I think it's been used for quite a while, actually. What they do is they tell the children, I'm going to ask you a question. You're going to think about it. Then you're going to write it down on a piece of paper, your answer. Then you're going to get a friend, the person sitting next to you, and then you're going to share your answer with that person, and you're going to talk through. Now, the best way for this was because you would know that each individual child has actually thought about the question themselves. They formulated an answer, and then they've gone and discussed it with somebody else. And then they'd be discussing, and one would say, yeah, but I got 10 as an answer. Another one would be like, no, it's 20. You've got it wrong. It's 20. Then they'd have to discuss it with each other. And that's them formulating, getting those skills of teamwork together as well. And then they can reason and then try and figure out, okay, which one is the actual correct answer. But the whole point of this think, pair, share is that you get to know the real understanding of particular students rather than have that same mentality where everyone just has the same answer. Observation, you probably do quite a lot of. So when you're there, you're observing, you're just keeping an eye on someone, you're looking at how they're playing. You might do it without realizing you're doing it. You might have in the past looked at some students, and then you might have said, oh, to your class teacher, child Y has an issue with sharing. We need to go and teach child Y that sharing techniques, or we need to get them more involved or speak to them about having kind hands and so on. So observation is quite a powerful technique for your learning and also for your child's, social needs as well. So are you okay with these parts? Do you want to go over anything?
No, I'm fine.
Yeah. So on here, when you're answering 1.2, you just need to look at the different methods of assessment. So just what we've already gone through, like questioning, observing, and so on. What are they? How are they actually done? So how would you do them within your classroom? Just thinking, what have I spelt here? How do they help you to meet? That's meant to be a T. I'll fix that later. So how do they help you to meet the individual needs of your learners? And then how do you actually use these methods in your initial formative, summative, or holistic assessments? So now you're carrying out initial assessments, what do you physically do? Do you question them verbally and then ask them for an answer? Or do you show them a piece of paper where they can look at the sounds and then verbally answer you and so on? So just talk about how they're done. And then at the end of it, what do you think about these methods? Put down a judgment. Do you agree with these methods, or are there some methods that just seem too far-fetched, or maybe like the multiple choice questions might not be good for your age group? So you could put down that some of these methods are nice, but they're not really realistic for younger groups. Let's go on to 1.3. Now, this is to use types and methods of assessment to meet the individual needs of learners. So again, it is all about diversity, inclusion. Again, it comes into everything that we're doing. So as an educator, it is fundamental that you identify your learners' needs and that you look at that information that you've got so you can implement it within your own practice. So learners' needs can actually be identified through a variety of assessments. It helps you to understand their preferences. It helps you to adapt your teaching approaches and develop different approaches in which you can engage learners. So you'll know there's one child that you have to speak to very softly, and you have to go sweetheart, love, and then that will encourage them to learn. Another child, it might have that if you speak to them nicely or sweetly, let's say, because we should speak to everybody nicely, If you're speaking to them in an overly sweet voice, they're going to start acting out because it won't work for them. And you have to be a little bit more, hands-on and say, no, get on with your work right now. I want this done in 5 minutes. Or even different strategies like, if you get your work done, I'll make sure that you get 5 minutes extra break time later on in the day, and so on. So it's just you doing these approaches to make sure that your learners are actually engaged. And it's all about even getting to know them as well.
Yes.
These assessments will help you to meet your learners' needs, set targets, and also to develop a supportive learning environment, which is really important, because if the students don't feel comfortable, if they don't feel supported, they're not going to work in the best way. So we're going to talk about initial assessment. So as it suggests in its name, this is the first method to check out what your learner's actual ability is. So within this information that you're getting from your initial assessment, you can create an ILP, like an individual learning program. So I think we talked about this a couple of units ago, where I was mentioning that you probably, within your classroom or somewhere within the locality of your area, each child may have a folder. It might be a physical folder, or it might be an electronic one where they've got learning plans and they've all got little sections here. So the results of these initial assessments help you to develop objectives for your learners, and also to put down any extra learning requirements that your student might need. Like you've got one student that has the hearing impairment, I think, or there was a student you were talking about that has goes somewhere, don't they? And then when they come back, they feel like they're a little bit more ahead within the topic. What was this for? Was it maths or was it English? What was that student going away for?
For English, EAL support.
And it makes them feel really confident, doesn't it? When they come back, they're like, yeah, I know what's going on.
Yes.
And then it's just that type of support, having that a couple of minutes extra, a half hour, an hour here and there. And it really does make the student feel supported, like they're being looked after. And it helps to give them that comfort that they need. These initial assessments also help to build an understanding of learners and what their styles and learning motivations are, what their learning style is, what their aspirations are if they're older. Like with yourself, you've come into study now in adulthood, and you've got aspirations. You want to do a certain thing, so it's nice for me to know, as your tutor, what do you actually do? What's driving you to do all these things, so that I can actually try and assist you to make sure that you get to where you want to go, and also to be able to know what your ability levels are, so I can make sure that, maybe if you didn't have a level 2 English, I'll be like, right, let's get your level 2 English sorted out as well, or it's very important that you get your level 2 maths with this as well, so that you can go to your course of action where you want to end up in within a couple of years. So it really, initial assessments are fantastic for that. Now, if you have ever done other courses in functional skills, for example, you might have come across the BKSB initial assessments, but if you haven't, just type in BKSB, which is this here, and you'll see that they've got like assessments that you can do online for yourselves as well. A lot of companies actually pay to have that program, where they'll get you to do tests like the Manchester College. They'll get you to do those tests online, and then they'll give you results saying, oh, you've got a level 2 in English is your natural result, or you've got a level 1 or a level 3 in maths, and so on. So it saves your teacher from actually having to spend that time physically marking your work, because it's a software program that everything is done for you automatically. It's easy to administer, and it's just done.
Okay.
So these different types of assessment, methods of assessment, you can do it for maths and English functional skills. Now, these just like that BKSB site, there's loads of different variations of that, but I like that one because it's nice and simple. they just identify what your current maths and English levels are. And it also shows that because there's some particular topics that you want to study, you need a certain level of English, you need a certain level of maths to be able to do them competently. So if you've got if for example, if you were teaching a course that said that all of your students need a level 2 maths because you're going to be teaching aspects of maths within that, and they don't all have that level 2 maths, they might not be the best course for them to complete until they've gone ahead and got that, or you might have to adapt it in a way so that you can actually meet that student's needs and support them to actually complete that course. These assessments will also, initial assessments also will help you to find out what your previous academic ability is. And it just lets you know, like for now, you're doing this level 4 course now. If you wanted to go into level 5, you might be able to take some of these credits onto your level 5 education and training so that you won't have to repeat some of the units that you've already done here. So it takes off accreditations for you. You can do, what do you call it, recognition of prior learning. I think it's called RPL, that type of things on here. Or in a basic way, it can also be that you might need to resit your maths or your English exam just so that you can be eligible to do the course that you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then in an initial assessment, it's really nice if you can have an enrollment interview. Now, a lot of these things, being in primary, they're not going to be based upon what you're doing, but it's because we're doing this can lead into from primary to further education, into adult education. These are more for like the adult education side on here. So if you were doing an enrollment interview, which is something that you may have done when you were joining this course, where you might have had a phone conversation with one of the admin staff, and they might have just, had a conversation with you, find out what your motivations are, what your aspirations are, what sort of things you want. Even with that induction that we did, and I was asking you loads of questions, it just gives me an idea of what sort of where you want to head and what you want to do. It's nice to help to know what your targets are so we can work towards those. And now on to diagnostic assessments. Now, diagnostic assessments, and now remember in primary, sometimes initial and diagnostic are done together. When you're going into further education, diagnostic assessments will be done after your initial assessment is done. And they just look at what your functional skills are. So what actual educational skills you've got. They'll give you a very good picture of what your students good at, and also what they're starting from within their academic journey, so that you know exactly how to adapt your classes in accordance to that. They'll also help you to identify what your students' learning needs are, and then you can actually agree learning goals at this stage as well, and set targets and say, right, you might have some students that might have 2 years to do a qualification, and they might want to take the full 2 years to do it. There might be other students like you who have just started and almost finished with it, that you're just keen to say, right, I want to carry this on week by week. I don't want to take any breaks, and I'll make sure that I keep on top of it so that we can follow the pace you want to go. And then again, it gives your student the sense of ownership on the course that they're doing. They're saying, right, when you're on here, you get on, you do your studying, you probably feel like, right, if I'm finishing this section today, this week, next week I'll finish the next, and it'll take me a couple of weeks, I'll do 1 unit at a time, then I won't be falling back. So you've got the ownership where you know that you're taking charge of where you want to do and the pace of your course as well. So it motivates you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So on to summative assessments. So again, you know what summative assessments are. So they're just graded tests. They can be book reports where you've just written a book report. Science projects, multimedia presentations like PowerPoint presentations, essays, reports, exams, portfolios, and I should have added dissertations if it's in a university type of environment on there as well. So are you okay with the types and methods of assessment that we've just gone over?
No, that's fine.
Yeah. Brilliant. So for here, you just need to show how you actually use the different types and methods of assessments with your learners. So on this, you can stick with the primary section and just talk about what you do with your primary students, but then make sure you include a section just for older students. Say if I was to be teaching children or young learners within high school and further education, these are the assessments I would do. Or in adult education, I'll make sure that we do a initial assessment and diagnostic assessments where we're looking at the maths, IT and English skills and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so first you talk about the different types and methods. So what do you do? And then say, what actual types of assessments do you use? This can be involved in here in the first point as well. So you talk about informative assessments. I'll make sure to give my students spelling tests just to see if they're embedding that sound that we're talking about. I might give them a simple maths test. Or at the end of a lesson, I might put up a game on the interactive whiteboard and see if they can, put things in number order. Oh, wrong one. And then how do you actually conduct these? So just talk about, do you do it in tests, books, reports, observations, orally, or like exams? Now on here, because it says use, again, this is a present tense. So make sure that you write I do or I use this by, not I did this by or we used this by or when I was in class. You go, when I am in class, this is what I do. So make it present tense. One more tip for you as well, because I know that you're working in a supportive role at the moment. Even if it's something that you see your class teachers do, just change it to an I. Say, I do it. Don't say that we're doing these things. Just talk about as if you're the person that you've noticed doing it.
Okay.
Yeah. Are you okay with this?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. We're almost at the end. We've only got two more criteria to go through. So on here is use peer and self-assessment to promote learners' involvement and personal responsibility in the assessment for their learning and of their learning in the simplistic way. So when students carry out self-assessments, it is really a very good opportunity for that student to actually evaluate what their own skills are, what they're working at, what their progress they're making. And again, it helps them to identify what strengths they've got and what weaknesses they've got. And it will help them to actually understand what they need to work on and set realistic goals. So self-assessment can be done in very basic forms when the children are younger. But I'd say that self-assessment really takes shape from year 5 onwards. Mm-hmm. Because you can really get them to take charge of what they're doing, how well they're doing it. Mm-hmm. Now, then you've got peer assessment. Again, I'd say year 5 onwards is a nice age for them to actually understand what they're doing. Because when they're younger, they'll do what you tell them to do, but they might not understand it. So peer assessment is just where students are assessing each other's work. So if we were to sit next to each other, we'll swap our books with each other, and you've probably already seen it happen or done it in class, and then we'll mark each other's work, and then we'll swap back and we'll say, oh, okay, what did Geeta mark me as, and what did Afshar mark me as, and so on. So self-assessment is more accurately defined as a process by which students, and this is the process what they do, so it's number 1 is monitor and evaluate the quality of their thinking and behavior when learning, and number 2 is they can also identify strategies that improve their understanding and skills. So when they're doing self-assessment, students on their own, they're actually carrying a judgment of their own work out on themselves. They're looking at what they've done well, and then they're also looking at areas where they might not have done as great as they wanted to, so that they can see where they lacked and what they can do to get to it. Self-assessment actually aligns very closely within the standards-based education, so things like national curriculum for the younger students, and also depending on what awarding body you got, all of these awarding bodies do have their standards matching these self-assessments that are done. And then the self-assessments actually identify further learning targets and also instructional strategies, or correctives as we can call it, that students can apply and improve for their own achievement. So on here, I remember doing I was in year 5 a few years ago. And I remember the students were doing their assessments for the spring term. We did the assessments. I went away, I marked them. My class teacher gave me the answer book, gave me that test, and said, right, I want you to mark this of comprehension questions for me. So I went away, I marked them. When I came back, when it was time to share the assessments with the actual students, all the teacher did was pass out the papers to the students. And then the students were saying, oh, I don't understand. Why did I get 15 out of 30? Or why I got 28 out of 30? Fantastic. So what I really liked at that time, what she did was she actually took a paper and she put down the answers. They all worked through the test together, the whole class. And then they went through every single question. And when she did that, all these students were able to judge where they'd gone right, where they'd gone wrong, what they were lacking. And they were able to mark it on their papers as well, so that they could take some feedback. And then they made little points in their notebook saying that, oh, okay, make sure to focus on my sentence structure wasn't great, or I wasn't using adjectives in my sentence, or there wasn't any full stops or capital letters. So they actually judged where they went wrong, and they were able to go and fix that at later dates and just work on it. So self-assessment is quite a good tool to get your students really interested in what went wrong and how they can improve it. So peer assessment. So this is, again, like we said before, is when one student will assess another student's work, depending on what the rules are set by their teacher. So, for example, you could be at the front of the class, you've got a year 3 classroom, and you say, everybody swap your work with the person on your right. They pass their books on. And then you'll stand at the front and you'll say, oh, okay, right, the answer for number 1 was this, and then you go down the list. And then they'll mark as they go past. When they've done that, they'll pass the books back. And then because you know that obviously no one's going to have cheated now, because they're not marking their own work. They're all marking someone else's work. They're not going to be bothered about changing answers and so on. So it's a nice way for you to use that assistance there. But again, you're also having that engagement with your peers as well. For these students that are marking each other's work, they're actually able to look at how other people answer questions. Do they do it in like one word, or have they done full sentences? You know, what their grammar was like, what their spelling was like, how they worked a maths question out. So it's sort of like a way of tutoring each other unconsciously as well. And then again, we've just got examples of self and peer assessments. You can do like fill out self-assessment forms, just like simply where you're asking the student, saying that, you know, did I find this work interesting, agree, disagree, or strongly agree? You know, did you make a strong effort? Are you proud of the results you got? That type of thing there. And then you've got another peer assessment where you might have rather than just saying, here you go, mark each other's books, you might actually give them a form and say, look at this child's book, how were they, you know, what do you think they, at the beginning, what have they developed, what do you think they put more detail about, so a little bit more in depth. I'd say this is more for a grown-up or a high school base here. And then one of the ones, you know, I like this, the what I know, what I want to know, and what I learned chart. So you can figure out, they can put down what they already know at the beginning of the lesson, what they want to know, and then at the end of the lesson, you can they can put down what they've actually learned. So you've got to know what their prior knowledge was, what sort of curiosities they had, or what their interests were in learning, and then you can see what they've actually retained at the end of the lesson. If you find out there's a section where it says what I want to know and their question hasn't been answered, you can always ask them, has your question been answered for what you wanted to know? And if it hasn't, then you can give them a couple of minutes extra and say, right, ask me your question. And it gives it a nice interactive question and answer session where you're really involving and motivating your students as well. Okay, so are you okay with peer and self-assessment that we've looked at?
Yes.
So on here, you just need to use the present tense again. You need to explain what self-assessment is and what peer assessment is and how you actually use them with your students. Now, if you notice that you don't use them in your class, have you worked in any other older years within school?
I did actually.
Yeah.
Where they were just like for peer marking, they were like marking each other's spellings after spelling test.
Exactly. So you can talk about how they do peer marking, and then for a self-assessment, you can just maybe get some examples of how they self-assess their work. Now, I've got a couple of examples here that will help as well. So next, you're going to talk about how this helps you get your students involved. And then also how this sets up a personal responsibility for their own learning. Now this, for a lot of ages of students, regardless of what their age is, you can set up responsibilities for their own learning. You can give them targets. So you might notice that at the beginning of a section or at the beginning of a book, child on the cover of the book inside might write down what their actual targets are. And there'll be things like use full stops, use finger spaces, use capital letters, use an adjective in your sentence, or a describing word if they're very young. So this actually sets up a target, because when they're actually doing their work on a normal basis, they know they've got a reminder that they need to use full stop so they can meet that target. They've got to do their finger spaces and they've got to do the capital letters. When they meet those targets, then they can get their new set of targets for the next stage of learning. So it does give them responsibility to make sure that they're actually doing it. Now also on here, I like you to include an appendice, like an attachment of a type of self-assessment and a type of peer assessment that you use in your class. Now, if you've got students' work that you know has been peer assessed, you can take a picture of it and just attach that as a photo. If you haven't, just create something yourself and then use different colored pen or something and just saying, I like, you know, that put something like a compliment sandwich at the bottom. I like your descriptions in your sentences, full stop. You'll need to use capital letters. But I also liked your storyline, or I loved your characters, you know, just to make sure a compliment, something negative in the middle saying what you need to do, and then something, like that. So there's many ways you can get around it.
Okay.
Include a picture of what I know, what I want to know, and what I've learned chart. If you do one of those, please just fill it out. You know, on any type of topic, and then just scan it or take a photo and attach that in. Yeah.
Okay. Sure.
Brilliant.
Can I use my children's, because I can see in their notebook they have peer marking.
Yeah, and as long as it's not got their names in it, that's okay. If it does, just cut out a piece of paper and put it on top of the name.
Cool.
Yeah. It's to be honest, because you get stuck in 1 year, especially with COVID now, you can't really walk around and go to different year groups, so you've got to be inventive in a lot of different things now. So for 1.5, last one now, use questioning and feedback to contribute to the assessment process. So for when we're using questioning and feedbacks, things like plenaries or having general conversations, have you come across a plenary before?
No.
Now, I normally create plenaries for my other courses. I don't do them for this course because we work as we go along. For my other courses, all I do is at the end of a slide, I will have a section saying what today we have learned, and I will just do a summary of what has been learned. That's all it is. A plenary is where a student can just put down a summary of what they've learned that day. So it can be 2 or 3 bullet points. If they're talking about volcanoes, I learned that volcanoes have molten lava. I learned that volcanoes can do this, that, or the other, and so on. Volcanoes don't erupt on a daily basis. Sometimes they can sit dormant for years. You know, that type of things. So you have things like a plenary where you're doing a summary of what the student has learned. Or you can have just general conversations just to get student feedback, just to get an understanding of what they've actually retained. So this can happen at any point in the lesson, but sometimes you do it at the end of lesson when you're finishing off and like, oh, okay, so what did we actually talk about today? What was your best part of the lesson? What did you like about this? You know, so you understand, or you can ask them a question and say, you know, when do volcanoes erupt? And then they can say, give the answer that you told them already. So questioning is actually a key element to ensure success in learning and assessment, because it really gives you food for thought when you're talking to your students, because you're asking them questions and you're forcing them to actually think, because they have to really, get their cogs turning. Now, in the first few sessions, you might not get many answers back, but if you say to them, I'm going to ask you questions, every time after lesson, I will be asking these questions. So what they're going to do is throughout the whole lesson, they're going to try and work a little bit hard and make sure that they do pay attention so that when you ask those questions and they answer well, they might get a reward like a sticker or, get put up to the star or something. So they want to, have those mini rewards just to help them get, and then it'll help them to actually retain what you're talking about. So it really does help. So examples of a plenary, like I've got here. So today I have learned that, and then they put down so you can give them a piece of paper. Again, it's just like a summary, isn't it? So an A4 piece of paper, have a few bubbles on it, depending on what their age requirements are. If they're very young children, you might just want them to say verbally to you, and you write it down on a whiteboard, what you've all learned. Or if they're older students, you might give them a piece of paper and say, today I have learned, and then put a topic, and then you can say what phrase they've learned, or what's the important thing that they've learned, or what they try to do today. So it's just you gathering these sheets of paper at the end of your activity, and you're understanding what they're actually doing. So you can use questioning and feedback with your assessment process, and this will help you to get a supporting range of evidence. So this evidence will actually confirm your learning, because you're looking at their knowledge, you're looking at their understanding, you're looking at their skills, you're looking at what sort of rewards you're giving them to actually motivate them to do this. What makes someone to actually get involved with this learning. And then it helps you to look at their motivation. You might notice that there's sometimes one particular student is quite apathetic, is just sits there and they're bored and they don't really do anything until you talk about a particular thing. So you might have touched on a topic that they like cars or dinosaurs or something, and then they got really animated. So you've realized this topic here, when I talk about dinosaurs, this child gets really motivated. So you might help you to actually incorporate that motivation factor within other lessons as well, to make sure that they actually are paying attention. So questioning and feedback will also assist with the following. So it'll help you to link learning of your product and process. So just product and process is just what topic you're teaching and how you're teaching it. It'll help you for your transferability of learning. So how your learning can be transferred. This will be more for older students. It'll help you identify further learning requirements, set targets and plan, student progression, and corroboration of assessor decision-making process. So what sort of decision are you going to make for the future learning? And also, again, to identify any needs that they might need for support. So finally, on to the last section now. To answer this, again, please use the present tense. So on here, simply all you've got to do is talk about how you use questioning and feedback to contribute to your assessment processes and the different activities you use. So all you've got to do on here is just have an example of a time where you did a lesson and then how you questioned your students, how you got feedback, what you talked about, and so on. And then also just include an appendix or an attachment of a plenary to support this. It doesn't have to be filled in, but you can say this is the type of thing that I use to get information. So go back to something like this.
Okay.
And have something similar to that. So yeah, and that's it for here. Are you okay with the, this last section that we've done?
Yeah.
Yeah, let me just turn.